A day 9 practice recap, a day 10 live scrimmage from the Saints. First time training camp they've done this. Almost like it's a preseason game zero because they're doing it on Sunday. And we're going to take a look at the defensive back depth chart. I'm Tim. Let's talk Saints. So to recap practice day 9, the one they held on Saturday, we're just probably not going to spend a lot of time on this. I think the bigger deal is going to be the scrimmage that's taking place actually right now as I'm recording on Sunday. Day 9, the consensus from the media was it was some I saw the word lackluster a couple of times. Slow, struggle, especially on the offensive side, but defense at times too, it sounds like just a lot less. But also both sides making some plays. So kind of almost attributing this to look, it's the peaks and valleys of training camp. You're in the dog days right now. So you came off two really good practices, the second of which on back-to-back days almost, the second of which was considered the best practice of training camp, it seems like by everybody and by some media in attendance, the best training camp practice the Saints have had in years. So grain of salt, this just may be just a little bit of a letdown, nothing more than that. I think really the big takeaway when you look at the quarterbacks. The Shuck ran with the ones, Hayner ran with the twos, and Rattler ran with the threes for the first time in training camp. Now, I don't read a lot into that necessarily right now. And actually, Kellen Moore was asked about it after practice, and he said it was just that they noticed. And Ross Jackson, who I'm going to mention a couple of times, has done a great job kind of charting a lot of stuff going on in training camp. Um, and I think it was 20 more snaps Rattler had than the other two. And Moore addressed that basically saying, and we wanted to try to even up the reps that they're taking. So the threes by nature get less reps. And so that's why they made that switch, kind of let Shuck and Hayner close the gap a little bit that Rattler had opened up. And as an offshoot, Rattler gets almost a day off, just less reps, a lighter day without having to just not do work. So I get what they're doing there, and I don't know if that necessarily means anything. Just gonna Most of the talk was about the quarterbacks, about how they were looking on certain situations. So they ran again team up 11 on 11s, but it was a very heavy situational practice. They on two hard for the offense, but very critical things that the offense must learn to do. One is the 4-minute offense, where you basically drain the clock while you got a lead, so you don't stick your defense back on the field with a chance to lose the game, and starting on your own 2-yard line backed up. So that also may have had a little effect on some of the struggles that it seemed like the offense had. I won't go much deeper dive into quarterbacks because my full expectation on Wednesday is go heavy and hard with the quarterbacks. But I think just my opinion right now, I think Rattler's trending as the one. Hayner is trying to make a push for the two that everybody kind of thought Shuck was going to wind up with. Um, Subject to change. Definitely, this is just my opinion on what it feels like, the way it's going so far. And also kind of wondering if maybe moving Rattler back and letting Hayner and Shuck have the day where they have the two most reps isn't a little reference on that. I already heard some of the stuff going on in the scrimmage today about who's getting reps when, but not the whole practice. And I think that might shed a little light on it. So we may have that little longer conversation when we cover the scrimmage. I think defensively, the big thing that came out was Jonas Sanker was turning heads. And by some accounts, if it had been a full blown live NFL game, he'd have been taking some heads off. Looked very good in all aspects where they were using him because it sounds like he's sliding right in, at least based on this practice, with the other two safeties, with the ability to play high, play low, handle the flats, do some run contain, everything that the other two have been showcasing. One of the reasons why I do want to look at the defensive back chart a little later. And what I'm happy about is that now makes the third rookie defensive player we've drafted that started turning some heads and picking up steam to join Danny Stutzman at linebacker and Quincy Riley at cornerback. So we know the defense was going to be an overhaul and a work in process almost at the same time. And we kept looking at those rookies going, if we can hit on some of them, it's going to be a big jump because they are actually being drafted to fit what Brandon Staley wants to do. So I'm glad to hear Sanker's joining that group. I would love to hear some more about Broughton. And hopefully that'll happen soon. I think one of the real takeaways from this practice that's actually definitely worth mentioning is it's special teams. And it's looking like Groupie is nailing down that kicking job. Smith handled the kicking job on Saturday. Justin Reed blocked his extra point attempt. He had makes from 40, 51, and 53, missed from 46. According to Ross Jackson, again, who's been tracking everything through camp, he has Groupie 19 to 20 so far in training camp and Smith 13 to 22. That's a big gap. And Groupie had a pretty decent year last year, I think. So he's a veteran with 2 years under his belt. I think Smith is definitely dig himself a hole that he's going to be hard to get out of. And we now have a three-way punter battle because Kai Kroger, undrafted free agent, when we cut Deckers, joined. He was rotating with James Burnip on punts, the other undrafted free agent. So it sounds like Hayball was taking most of the special team work there. One thing of note is while working on punts and punt returns, the return rotation that I saw was Rashid Shaheed, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Dante Pettis, Hugo Amadi, and Jaden Price. Now, obviously, Shaheed's making the team, but the other four, I think, especially Jaden Price, but Peoples-Jones, Pettis, and Amadi, especially winning the punt return job gives them a solidity of making the 53 man roster that while I'm not saying that they don't have a good shot to make it, I think it's about a 50-50 for those three guys for the most part. So one of them becomes a primary punt returner. Yeah, you grab that spot on the 53. Lastly, of injury and availability, the pup guys are still on pup, but both Hill and Moreau were reported before practice getting some work in, which is, I guess, part of physical training rehab process. Fantastic. That is awesome to hear. Hopefully they, like we've been saying, their return's coming at some point this season, and Moreau hopefully soon. Bad news is Nick Saldivari placed on season-ending IR with a knee injury. We signed Shane Lemieux as his replacement. So that was taken care of. In fact, he practiced on Saturday. It sounds like Juwan Johnson, Devin Neal, and Landon Young were all limited at practice. Ridgway and Welsh sounds like they returned to a full practice. Kalen Saunders was excused, so he wasn't there Saturday. And JT Gray still held out of practice. And it seems like a possibly day-to-day thing, so maybe soon, but I'm beginning to think might be a couple of more days before we hear anything from him. So that's 9. 10 is the big day because it was announced, Kellen Moore to the media after practice. They're a call at scrimmage, as he said. They're play calling. They're going live um, in a structured way. It's not going to be a full blown live scrimmage game. But and like I said, I've seen a little bit that's happening already on Twitter. It's very structured, very specific. It sounds like both sides are going at it. Like this may be another one of those high energy, high intensity practices so far from what it sounds like. I hope it is. We'll cover that next. So the scrimmage just wound down a couple hours ago, and it was a pretty intense affair. Um, Thanks to Ross Jackson, who at least for the first scrimmage period was able to chart some of the statistics on the quarterbacks. I go through those first, and I kind of talk about everything that went on overall. But they started Rattler was with the ones, Tyler Shuck was with the twos, and he tweeted this right after this period ended. But they started the first part of the scrimmage was from the Saints 35-yard line. Rattler in 11 plays went 5 for 8. Uh, Ended up stalling out, and Groupie had to come in, kick a 35-yard field goal. Shuck took over the next series. He got 11 plays, went 8 for 8, threw a 4-yard touchdown pass to Jacobson, 1 for 1 on third down. He had a pass to convert to Kevin Austin Jr., and I believe this was the drive. At one point, he went 6 for 6 on 6 straight passes. So, two good drives to start with the 1v1s. Little red zone issue that's going to creep back up, but overall, looked good, right? Then things started kind of going the other way. Um, the second series that they ran was drives from the opponent's 40 plus. So they were spotting the ball, it sounds like somewhere between the 40 and 50-yard line. Rattler got the first go at it, 6 plays, finished 2 for 3, hit a big completion on his second attempt to get Rashid. I believe it was down the sideline, but basically a big completion to get inside the red zone. Then the drive stalled. Groupie had to come and kick another field goal, this one 34 yards. Shuck came in, 4 plays, was 0 for 1 passing. Groupie bangs a 58-yard field goal to kind of save the drive. And apparently what happened was he took a sack on second down from Amati. On third and long, he was able to scramble to get back into field goal range. And probably at the limit you want to test Groupie at a long 50, but Groupie comes through with the 58-yarder. So they immediately sent Shuck back out to run 4 more plays in that drive, 1 for 3 with a turnover on downs. Now, in here, did not see a breakdown on the running game, and nobody really talking about the running game. But when you look at the number of plays and on some of these and the number of attempts, I'm reading into that either there was more than just the Amati sack, or more than likely there were some running plays that didn't get charted down. Went into the second scrimmage period, and that was Shuck with the ones, but against the second team defense, and Rattler with the twos against the first team defense. So Shuck with ones against number 2D, Rattler with twos against number 1D. And Shuck's first drive drove down to the red zone again, and on a third down versus cover 0, looks like he got heavy pressure, tried to throw it away, and Moore has refs at every practice. They flagged him for intentional grounding, stalls the drive. The second drive, he gets down to the red zone. Jalen Ford drops a pick, and then a play or two later, Nephi Sewell actually picks him off on a pass into the end zone that sounded like Rashid Shaheed was open in the corner, and that's where he was trying to go with the ball. The only thing I know on Rattler so far, his first drive, he ends up on a 4th and 6, gets intercepted by Kool-Aid McKinstry on a slant route. As you got to this portion of the practice, what they were talking about was more and more coming from the defensive side. Third session, I didn't hear anything on. Shuck was running the first group, and Hayner did get some mentions in Twitter during practice afterwards. So I'm assuming they were splitting the 3-on-3s, and it was 3 versus 3 in that last scrimmage session. And actually, they were saying that went live tackling too. So it was a lot of intensity, a lot of hitting going on. Now, after practice, the overall breakdown came this way, because this went on for, it seemed, a couple of hours. Reports coming in like it was still coming from practice. Apparently it did, because they ran 126 plays from scrimmage. That is a lot. As Kellen Moore said to the media after practice, may have broken some kind of record there. It was all live play calls. So they did no prep work going into this. They had no scripted plays to run. They were calling everything in real time from the field. So the players had no prep work to draw from. There was no preparation involved. Moore mentioned, and also in the press conference, that that an NFL game is 3 hours long, and that's what they were trying to simulate with this scrimmage. The closest they could, the intensity and length, and how hard you have to really dig down to get through it in a 3-hour game. Uh, I think in hearing some of the talks from the, well, obviously from the media, that's where I'm getting most of this from, and their tweets and their post game or post practice wrap ups. But the coaches and the players alike, in some of their interviews that I caught, um, defense had the slight edge early. Offense was moving the ball in those first period and a little bit of the first stretch in the second, the one first drive that Chuck had. Red zone problems kind of rearing their ugly head again. Stalling out there, managed to get one touchdown pass out of it, Chuck to Jacobson. And there was mention that there was a drop touchdown in the end zone by Seth Green. Don't know who threw it or what drive. Just came up in the mentions. Um, But as practice wore on, I think with the consensus, and even some of the players from the offensive side was talking about this when in their turns talked to media, Landon Young being one of them, Cedric Wilson also, that the overall impression is as the practice wore on, the offense kind of wore down and allowed the defense to finish strong. There's mention there was multiple sacks coming in those periods, um, or likely multiple sacks. Obviously, they're not allowed to hit the quarterback, so you don't know for sure. But it seems like not a good sign, and that's what they were saying. Now you'd have went down. Couple of PBUs. I saw a clip of one of Justin Blackman and how much he can help this defense, and talk about him more when we look at the DB depth chart. He came a long way to running a long way with one of the tight ends. I couldn't get the number all the correctly from across the field. Went him step for step, and when the ball came in, he just knocked it down, made a great play on it. Um, the three interceptions that happened in this one, wow, that's a lot to be going on in a scrimmage where your quarterbacks turn the ball over three times. But again, that seemed to, unfortunately, in the red zone, you had two. You had the one on Kool-Aid on fourth down, but it kind of go along with that theme of could start early, struggle to finish, like in individual drives in the scrimmage itself, almost all the way through practice. So kind of rolling into this, you know, uh, gonna have to put it on a T-shirt that in it that Moore is saying that the NFL, it is about overcoming adversity and making adjustments. And the offense continually had to do that from practice to practice. And now they're going to have to do it again, for one thing, after this scrimmage, but also going to have to overcome and adjust during the game, because that's kind of the sound of it. It's like, hey, you held up early, but the defense kind of kept getting to you, so you're going to have to come back from that. You're going to have to make the adjustment. So next time this happens, which is likely going to be next Sunday against the Chargers, is you can score in the red zone. You don't turn the ball over. You don't take the play that kicks us out of field goal range, whatever. You know, got to finish those drives and close those plays out. Moving on to special teams, and one of the highlights, most of the non-quarterback players, they were talking a lot about Blackman, Chase Young, Rashid Shaheed apparently had a good day when they were able to get balls to him. And a couple other handful of names running around there. That sounds like they had some guys played really, really well in the scrimmage. But one of them that we're going to talk about is Blake Groupie, because it's and some of the people in the media are even throwing this out here, going, today he locked down the kicker job. And I think it was trending that way when we talked earlier about the day 9 practice, and you started looking at their overall numbers. But bangs one from 58. Offense struggles, but every time they got him down there, he kicks a field goal. We come away with points. And realistically, these struggles are going to continue from week 1 to week 17, week 18. I'm pretty sure, just by nature of the reset and then in the young quarterback situation, everything else we got going on. So anytime you get down there and get a chance to get points, if you don't score a touchdown, you damn sure have to get the field goal. Looks like Groupie has been rock solid so far through training camp. Keeps it going. He'll be our kicker again this year. In the availability, Will Clapp went down, and I saw it on Twitter. I think it was Nick Underhill. Will Clapp just went down for a while and was helped off the field. I'm like, oh, shit, here we go. A little while later, get a tweet from someone saying, oh, yeah, no, Will Clapp's back on the field and out there again. It's like, good. As far as I know, that's the only scare they had. Didn't hear a mention of anybody else going down, so I think we came out okay. During the actual practice, they mentioned Juwan Johnson was limited. They were working a lot of the other tight ends, so probably part of it was to get a lot of work to the other tight ends, because we got some holes to fill there while waiting for some people to become fully healthy, obviously, and give him a little bit of rest on that injury. So he's, we bring him back and get him 100% as soon as we can. JT Gray is still missing, so we'll keep checking on that. But like I said, it seems like we got through everybody else fairly good shape, which is really good news, especially once they started. I made note of it. Like I said, the tweet clapped down and was out for a while, but then working with the trainers, then came back in, and not hearing anything more. And they're normally pretty quick about sending that out there when it happens. So, feel really good about it. And I'm feeling really, really good about 126 plays in a scrimmage and a pretty hot day outside in South Louisiana and coming away healthily intact with a day off tomorrow. Going, if I take nothing else from this scrimmage, I'm taking away offense still has a long way to go and improve. Defense, maybe. We've got something built there. I think our kicker's pretty much decided, and so far Ted Rath is doing a bang up job, and more and more is looking like the most important hire so far that we've made this offseason. So I think this was very good for the team, and we'll see how it plays out in the future. But I really, really do want to see that next practice when they come in on Tuesday. Again, another kind of building block type thing, and I really want to see that offense rebound. I have to see that offense rebound, overcome adversity, and make the adjustment. I want to take a look at the depth chart in general, the 53-man roster, kind of in segments. And this is mostly from I'm trying to be ready to build for when we're going to start projecting the 53 man. But in doing so, one thing I got to mention beforehand, kind of have to look at it a little differently than I think we're used to, because we're talking uh, normal terminology for defense, especially since we were running so much 4-3. Defensive ends, defensive tackles, linebackers, cornerback, safety. Where this scheme and the way that it's going to be run, especially when you're going to be using multiple fronts, both odd and even, the terminology can get a little mixed. So for this point, we're going to refer to defensive backs. We're going to refer to defensive interior. That is the linemen on the line of scrimmage that line up somewhere between the two offensive tackles. And then off the ball, which typically linebackers, your middle linebackers, your outside linebackers. But if you're in a 4-3, that would include what we would consider defensive ends. The reason why I bring this up, 53-man roster, punter, kicker, long snapper. So now you have 50 spots to play with. Let's just split it down the middle, 25 and 25. How is that going to look? That's kind of the stuff I've been dealing with, trying to figure out. But what I got a little excited about, looking at the defensive backs, going, man, we may be really, really, really good there. Because you pull up all the names that we have on the roster, and the ones I don't have on here, I just threw practice squad in there. But more than likely, Davison, safety, Bynum, Price, and Wright, three cornerbacks, they're going to be fighting over some spots on the practice squad. Not saying that they can't find themselves on the 53, especially say like Price if he wins the punt return job, but saying more than likely, I'm going to leave those off for just a bit, which leaves us with, I think right now it sounds like Yidam is going to occupy one starting corner spot opposite of Kool-Aid McKinstry. Riley and Rico Payton, the two second teamers, kind of backing him up. And Payton put ST by his name as one of our primary special teamers. Taylor in the store. I have Ugo Amadi behind Taylor just because I don't quite know where to put him. And he's not in bold, but I really want to because I feel like he's got a really good shot at making this roster. He is a Jimmy or a Joe when we talk about that. He's not one of the studs in red or potential studs, and I don't think he ever will be. He's one of those Jimmy and Joes, put in the work day in, day out, where you can use in multiple spots. Yes, he can be beaten, but yes, he can make some plays, and he's fairly reliable and good on special teams. I just don't know if where he's going to fit in. So look at our starting safeties. It's obviously Reed and Blackman, and this is what started me off on this train of thought about how good this secondary can be is, well, neither one is necessarily Honey Badger in his prime. Probably pretty equal to or almost equal to Honey Badger um, last year, kind of what we were getting out of them. So, I mean, if you get that from both of them, you have a really good, solid safety. If you get more than that and approaching Honey Badger in his prime, you got a guy that's going to run around out there and just make obscene plays. Honey Badger did it at a Hall of Fame level. Don't know if either one of these two guys can do it, but we'll see. You figure Sanker's making the team. Like you said, he's one of the rookies drafted specifically to play in this defense. And he is really starting to pop and had a great day in practice number 9. JT Gray, if he's healthy, he's the one that I would be a little going, if he's can't get healthy, does he make the roster? Because he's there primarily as a special teamer. He's played a little safety. I think most people are like me, or I'll just say, in my opinion, I hold my breath every time somebody gets a little banged up and we have to put JT Gray out there to take snaps at safety. So I don't know. If he can't go, that could make it a gray area. Not sure how it'll turn out, but for right now, I got him making the roster. That leaves Terrell Burgess and Jordan Howden. And one of those two has got to be our backup safety. So if you think about our other backup safety next to Jonas Sanker. So if you're keeping the 4 primary cornerbacks, and I feel pretty safe about those, Taylor is your star. That's 5. Your 2 starting safeties is 6 and 7. Well, then the numbers game starts coming in. How many are you keeping? Okay. Traditionally, you feel like 10. You're pretty close there. Who's fighting for those last 3 spots? And you have some names there that, like I said, even Howden coverage. Yeah, we know we've watched the last 2 years, but we know he can tackle, and he's fairly solid against the run. Marty, like I said, is just a solid, not necessarily spectacular, but solid player, and I think he's mostly reliable. Burgess is a very experienced NFL safety, has played with Staley and with the Chargers, and he's been mentioned several times as quietly having a really good training camp, so he could stick around. But when you look at the other positions, let's say you keep 5 defensive interior. Let's say you keep 5 off the ball guys. Any combination thereof, and we've got some flexible players, especially off the ball. That's 10. 10 defensive backs is 20. You still technically have 5 spots to play with as long as you're not going to cannibalize any from the offensive side. You may see a couple more of these defensive backs in 11 or 12. I don't know if that's outside the realm of possibility when you stop and think. One of the things that Staley has shown, and there's a clip of Eric McCoy talking about it last week in practice, I believe, what they call his penny front, which is basically 5-1. So 3 defensive interior, 2 defensive edge, 5 men on the line of scrimmage with Demario Davis behind him and playing with extra DBs. If you're going to run a lot of pulling, and it's almost the equivalent of where we ran the 4-2 so much last year. So, and is there a version of that where you go even and you still keep an extra defensive back on the field? So I'm looking at that spot going, there's enough here, I think, because I think about Howden comes to mind, playing in the run when you're getting some type of penny, and he's now out there primarily as a run stopper, almost playing as a smaller linebacker, maybe. Probably a role he can handle as long as he's not got to get in there and mix it up with the big guys, but could probably give you just enough coverage. Because when you're doing stuff like that, and this is why I bring up Eric McCoy, because he said, yeah, every time they get in that, it messes with me. So if you can do something that can mess with Eric McCoy a little bit while he's lining up over the ball, getting ready to call the offensive line signals, thinking stuff like that Staley can bring in, if you can integrate it in the defense, you start looking at some of these pieces back here going, some of the guys that are borderline. And that's why I'm not ready to write off any of the guys that I'm saying might even be on the practice squad, because they may be a skill set Staley's looking at going, he can return punts. And when we're doing X on defense, that guy's going to have a role. It may only be 5 to 10 snaps a game, but he would fit what we want to do. So I haven't quite broken down the other sections yet. I kind of started on the back end, knowing because when you start off with Kool-Aid, Alante, and now our two new safeties. I'm like, man, that's a strong four to come out in the NFL with to play those positions. So if I had to start putting confidence levels on defensive back, yeah, defensive interior, defensive line, off the ball guys, I'm thinking right now my highest confidence level is on the secondary. And I think normally you would be like, well, without the front, that's kind of useless. And you'd be 100% correct. But I do think that Staley may be able to steal a little bit here and there, um, using some of these extra looks with defensive backs with some of the personnel that we have. But we will talk later about what's going to go on, interior, the edge, and the off the ball guys. Thinking, you know, where those numbers lay going, it could be interesting. It's going to be a numbers game, but I think in the secondary, I'm pretty sure you can pin seven as long as they're healthy. About seven of these names in, and go anywhere to three to possibly four, maybe five more. I don't know if we get that far. We're going, yeah, they could make the 53 man and be real contributors in Staley's defense. That's what we got for you today. Looking ahead, like I said, Wednesday, I really want to start taking, and I think it deserves a full episode, a deep dive into where we are at the quarterbacks. We've been kind of dancing around the issues. Probably time to focus in on it a little bit more, um, because I also think camp's about winding down, and as far as let's talk Saints. We're gonna be transitioning more into the season phase as we kind of get into the preseason, where you know it's going to be a lot less about what's going on in practice and more about the prep work, injury report, stuff like that, who we're playing, what they're looking like, et cetera, kind of move that way. But since we're not actually in the season, there will be some training camp like components still floating around. So we're going to try to take a look at these positions, quarterback being the most important, and ready to dive into that. Some of the other ones working towards. Can I give you a best guess of the 53 man roster? Probably. But I think, like saying, talking about the defensive back, there's some real question in some spots. How many are they going to keep before you even get to the point of who's going to make it, who's on the bubble, and who's probably at best practice squad type material? So that's where we'll be. First time here, go ahead, give me the subscribe, the likes up, the share. Um, I just kind of getting overwhelmed with some of the love you guys are showing me and you ladies. So appreciate the support you're giving the channel, and I'm going to keep trying to work hard, give you a reason to support us. So till I see you next time, I'm Tim. Peace out, and who dat.